Okay, good morning. We are continuing with our chapter 6. Let's review some of our key words. What does westward expansion mean? Cole.
Expanded during the 1800s, the movement of settlers and immigrants from the eastern United States to the
Midwest and the West. Good. So it's starting off on the the eastern side of the United States where those first 13 colonies were, and it was expanding across to the Midwest, the middle part of the country, all the way over to the western coast, all the way over to California. We called it Manifest Destiny because we believe that we should own from coast to coast. So that westward expansion was a very big deal for the United States. And we'll see how that westward expansion idea, that idea of manifest destiny, plays a big role in how things took place. Our next word is treaty. In order to move across the land and get that land, we needed to form treaties with the American Indians. What is a treaty, Izzy? It's a formal agreement, a written agreement between two or more nations. So they're not just saying it, hey, let's be friends, let's take care of one another. It's a written agreement. You do this and we will do that. It's kind of a binding agreement. And in order to have that binding agreement, we needed to ratify these treaties. What does it mean to ratify, Lily? Yeah, to approve it formally. So it wasn't just vocally saying, oh, we should do this. It was agreed upon formally. Those treaties got us our territories. That's how we were able to expand across. What is a territory, Nathan?
Part of the United States that is not within the state, but it's organized within the governing leaders.
So it's part of the United States that's not an actual state. Now we have 48 states going from coast to coast, plus Alaska and Hawaii. So all of those states are states of the United States. Back then they were just territories as they were expanding westward. So they would get the territories, and then later the territories became states. We still have some territories today that aren't states yet. We don't know if they ever will become states or if they'll just remain territories. To pay for these territories through the treaties, we had annuities. What is an annuity, Nolan?
An annual payment of food and money that the U.S. government paid to American Indians in return for their land.
Yeah, so it's what the United States paid to the American Indians. It was food and money they paid to them to give us their land. So we didn't just take the land, we wanted to give them back something for the land that we wanted. In getting that annuity, we were paying for land. So now the American Indians need somewhere else to live. Where are they going to be living, Paisley?
A reservation of the land set aside or reserved by the U.S. government for use by the American Indian group.
So it's land that's reserved. So a reservation is reserved land that they set aside just for American Indians. Nobody else can go live there. Nobody else can tell them what to do on the reservation. That's the American Indian land. So it's a smaller area of land than what they were used to, but it was theirs, and they get to keep it. What is a debt, Caitlin?
Something that is owed, such as money, goods, or services.
A debt is something that's owed, like money, goods, or services. Their last one is assimilation. What does assimilation mean, Will?
Adopting the values and habits of a large group.
Adopting the values and habits of the larger group. So think about me coming into St. Vincent de Paul. I had my way of doing things from my old school. I had been there for many years. I had my way of doing things, and I came into St. Vincent's, and instead of saying everybody needs to do things the way that I do them, I assimilated to St. Vincent's. We didn't use devices at my old school. That it wasn't a one-to-one school. So I came in here and I didn't say, everybody put your devices away, we're never using them. I'm having to do stuff like doing Google Classroom and getting stuff on there. And we're going to have assignments. We might have a project that we have to do on on your device. So I had to assimilate some of my teaching style, some of my ways of doing things to the way St. Vincent's does it, because there's more of you and only one of me. So think about the American Indians. There's a small group of them and a large group of white settlers coming in. So they wanted the American Indians to assimilate and become like them instead of staying separate and different. Let's look at our reading for today. We left off on page 107. So at the top of 107, we have a green box talking about fashion. Fashion, it's been around for centuries. We are recording today, so I'm going to do the reading so it's easy for people at home to hear it. Yesterday, we didn't do the recording, so you guys were able to read. So we're taking turns. My other group wanted to do the readings today, so you get to hear my voice today. Chances are, if you look around at other students, you'll notice a type of shoe or jeans or even a haircut that's currently in style. Wearing the latest fashions is important to many people today, perhaps even your parents. It's been that way for hundreds of years. Fashion is not just fun, it's also big business. Believe it or not, the main reason the North American fur trade became less profitable in the 1800s was because of changing fashions. For over 150 years, it had been the peak of fashion to wear a top hat made from felted beaver or muskrat fur. Eventually, fashion changed, and many people began to prefer top hats made of silk, like the one shown in the picture here. They thought the new shiny material looked more elegant. The fur trade turned into the silk trade, and silk was not produced in Minnesota. This change in fashion helped the fur trade as a big business in Minnesota. Helped end the fur trade as a big business in Minnesota. It was a costly change for the Ojibwe, the Dakota, and the fur trading companies. So think about that. 150 years, it's been a staple. They need pelts, they need pelts, they need pelts. Oh my goodness, this new land in America has all these beaver pelts. We don't have any more beavers left in Europe because for 150 years we've been hunting, trapping the beaver to make these hats so people can look all rich and powerful. So now they're getting all the pelts from America, and then fashion changed. And people said, oh, beaver hats? That's so last year. We want the silk hats now. And all of a sudden, overnight, just like that, people stopped buying the pelts because now they want the silk. And silk comes from Asia. So now all of a sudden, America doesn't have that natural resource to provide. So all these hunters and trappers, now nobody's buying their pelts. The fur trading companies, nobody's buying the pelts from them to produce the hats. So things are changing, and we're going to see how that plays a large role in how Minnesota changes at this time. American settlements grow. In 1837, the Dakota and the Ojibwe signed treaties with the United States. These treaties opened up land for settlements between the Mississippi and St. Croix rivers. So remember, they had signed the first treaty with Pike. It was a Ebenezer Pike, and that's how we got Fort Snelling at the Bedote between the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. So now there's another big treaty in 1837. The Ojibwe and the Dakota had not yet been paid, so they hadn't even been paid yet, and they're already coming in and cutting down. There's the thud of axes and the crash of fallen trees. Americans had moved in seeking timber and land. They were building sawmills and settlements on the St. Croix at places they named Marine on St. Croix, Taylor's Falls, Stillwater. These are names we still have today. Yeah.
My aunt and cousins live in Stillwater.
Yep. Stillwater's not that far from us. Taylor's Falls, not that far from us. Around 1838, another settlement began to grow just down the Mississippi River from Fort Snelling. It was called Pig's Eye Landing for a one-eyed man who opened a tavern there. Later, settlers decided to rename the town St. Paul for a little log church built by a missionary priest. So our capital city, St. Paul, its original name was Pig's Eye Landing. Can you imagine if they never renamed that town and our capital of Minnesota would be called Pig's Eye Landing? That would be very interesting when people are learning their capitals of the states and they have to learn Pig's Eye Landing. Across the river from St. Paul was Little Crow's village, also known as Kaposa. The people of Kaposa anxiously watched the changes going on around them. The Dakota knew other native people had been pushed from their lands. They feared they would soon be forced to leave too. So they're watching all these settlers coming in, chopping down trees. They've never cut down trees. They lived in unity with the land. They didn't change the land like that. And now here come all these white settlers with all of these changes. They're saying, uh-oh, we know we've got some relatives in Wisconsin. They were forced off their land. Maybe down in Iowa, we know people that are being forced off their land. Are we going to lose our land? So there's this fear coming. Uh-oh, what is happening? Cole?
When I was in World for my brother's tournament, they the world symbols kind of like a Indian guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they told a story about how the Indians did something. I can't remember because it was a couple of days ago, but It was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of things throughout Minnesota that have those American Indian ties. So it's really good. That's our heritage. That's the people that lived here first. So it's good to know about those stories. Nick?
When I was younger, we went to this Ojibwe kind of history place.
Mm-hmm.
And it was up by my grandparents, so we went, and it was all this Ojibwe stuff, and they had some of the clothes that they wore,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of looked a lot different than what we wore.
Yeah. Yep. The way the Ojibwe lived was different than the way that the white settlers lived. And we're going to find out how those differences changed. Minnesota Territory. In 1849, Minnesota became a territory of the United States. It was not a state yet, but now it was officially part of the United States. Suddenly, it seemed as though everyone was talking about treaties. Nearly 5,000 American settlers were living in Minnesota Territory on the land purchased in the treaties of 1805 and 1837. More people wanted to move to the territory and settle in southern and western Minnesota. This land belonged to the Dakota, so the U.S. government would need to find a way to get it. So they're looking at this land and seeing all the natural resources there. The timber, there's all those woods, the lakes, all the area for farming. And they're saying, wow, this is really, really important land. We want this land. But the Dakota control it. So what do we do? How are we going to get this land so we can have that manifest destiny? We could have that westward expansion happening and own all this land. The new territorial governor, Alexander Ramsey, declared in 1849 that acquiring the land of the Dakota was his first goal. Ramsey and other U.S. leaders wanted to sign treaties to get this land. If they succeeded, the United States would gain millions of acres of land. In return, the United States planned to offer the Dakota a cash payment right away, followed by annuities for 50 years. The Dakota would also retain a portion of their territory called a reservation. This land would be reserved just for the Dakota. This would not be an easy decision for the Dakota, but some of their leaders agreed to meet with U.S. officials. So the very first governor of the territory is Alexander Ramsey. Has anybody heard the name Ramsey before? Owen? Anoka Ramsey. Ramsey County. Where is Ramsey County? What big city is in Ramsey County? St. Paul. What's the capital of Minnesota? St. Paul. So they named the county that St. Paul is in after the first governor. Anoka-Ramsey is the joining of Anoka County and Ramsey County. So that Ramsey is named after Alexander Ramsey. He played a big role in getting Minnesota land from the Dakota to be for Minnesota for the United States. Nick.
Did he do any other, did he make any other counties, like Ramsey County in Michigan? There's a Ramsey County in Michigan.
I'm guessing it's probably named after a different person. Because Alexander Ramsey was really big in Minnesota. I doubt that he moved over to Michigan. I don't know for a fact, though. Interpreters. We talked a lot about interpreters being the role of for the Ojibwe and the Dakota. So let's find out a little more about them. Language differences often made it difficult for settlers and native people to discuss their thoughts during the making of a treaty. Most U.S. government representatives did not speak native languages. Most American Indians could speak only a little English. So how did they communicate with each other? They relied on the interpreters, people familiar with the language and customs of both American Indians and European Americans. Often the interpreters were fur traders whom the American Indians knew. Sometimes native people, especially those who were mixed or Métis, so if they're mixed, that means their dad was probably European and the mom was probably the Native American Indian. So they have both cultures. So they're a mixture of both their parents' cultures. So they served as interpreters. In addition, missionaries who lived among the American Indians were also called on to translate. Although there were women who could interpret multiple languages, it was rare for them to be involved in formal treaty negotiations. Because remember, way back then in the 1800s, men and women had very different roles that they played. So the leading, the governing was left to the men. So the women didn't help with those decisions. Thankfully, times are different now, and we understand that it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female, it's what you're good at that matters. So times have changed. One of the more famous interpreters during this period was a fur trader named George Bonga. Bonga was the son of an African American fur trader and an Ojibwe woman. His father's parents had both been enslaved. Bonga spoke 3 languages: English, Ojibwe, and French. When the U.S. government began making treaties with the Ojibwe in Minnesota, Bonga was called upon to be an interpreter. His signature appears on the 1867 treaty between the Ojibwe and the United States. So it's just showing who these interpreters were. Motivations for treaties. Land for each. We're going to see the different perspectives here between the Dakota and the Americans and how they both viewed things very differently. So land for each, the Dakota. When it came to signing treaties, some Dakota felt that they really had no choice. They saw how powerful the U.S. government was and worried it would take over their lands no matter what. Treaties would allow them to reserve at least a portion of their land and control their own future. To some, establishing a reservation where the Dakota could live as they wanted was a reason to sign treaties. They were hearing about things like the Trail of Tears, where American Indians were forced to leave their land. And they're thinking, well, instead of being forced to do it, at least we could get the annuities. At least we could get the reservation. That's our land. So I guess it's better to sign the treaty than to get nothing at all and to be forced to move at gunpoint. So at least we're getting something. So some of these treaties they signed was because they thought they had no other choice. The Americans also had reasons for wanting to make treaties. Many believed their nation should expand across North America. They considered Minnesota an important part of that expansion, but they could not legally settle on American Indian lands unless treaties were signed. Alexander Ramsey set out to convince the Dakota and Ojibwe to sell their land. In a speech to the territorial legislature, Ramsey proclaimed that Minnesota was destined to become the land of American settlers. So it's that manifest destiny. I feel a conviction that this country, once thrown open for settlement, would be peopled with a rapidity exceeding anything in the history of Western civilization. So he's saying once we're able to settle in this land, it's going to happen quickly. People are going to come flooding into Minnesota because it's such a rich area. It's rich in the environment, the natural resources. So lots of people will come and settle in it. Money. The Dakota recognized the fur trade was ending. Many of them believed that the annuities they would receive by signing treaties would allow them to buy the blankets, tools, and food necessary for survival. The Dakota elderly Iyamani, known to the Americans as Running Walker, was among those who believed it was necessary to deal with the U.S. government. The Great Spirit does not smile. He growls at us. Something does not suit him. Our cornfields, where are they? Our young men cannot hunt. The powder in our rifles is wet. It will not burn. We kill no game. Nothing. So the American Indians are hurting. They've lost the things that they gained in the fur trade because the fur trade is ending. So they need to be able to get those things in a different way. It came up in the last class. His name is Running Walker. And somebody was like, well, that's an interesting name. And I said, well, think about it this way. A name like Paisley or a name like Nolan, the American Indians are going to say, oh, that's an interesting name. That's goofy and different. So just because it's not a name like we have doesn't mean it's a goofy name. It's just different. And we need to be respectful of those differences with any language. I know my cousin named somebody from China, and his name is Zhao Tang, which is a very different sounding name. I didn't know that name before. I've come to find out Zhao is a very common name, just like John is a common name. Ryan, Sam. We have names that we have multiple of here in sixth grade. It's the same thing with other languages. There are some names that are common and you might hear a lot of it. Just because it's different sounding, because it's a different language or it's a translation from a different language, we don't want to laugh at. The American Indian culture was, instead of naming the baby while the mom is still pregnant, Mr. Gambino and I had picked out our kids' names before they were even born. We knew that our firstborn was going to be named after Mr. Gambino's dad, so his name is going to be Mateo. Rosa is Roseanne. She's named after my mom. We had those names picked out before they were born. We knew what their names would be. The American Indians, instead of naming them before they're born, they wait until they're born and they get a sense of their personality. They let the spirits kind of speak to them and help them come up with that name. So I'm guessing somebody whose name is Running Walker is somebody who is very active as a baby. And they're saying, oh, they have a lot of running in them. They're active. So they gave that to them as their name. Somebody whose name is Smiles Friendly probably smiled a lot when they were a baby. And they had that happy personality. So again, we don't want to take away from the importance of their names, just like you don't want to take away from the importance of your names. Our parents named us our names for very important reasons, and we want to respect that. So we're going to respect the names that we read about in this book, whether they're names that are familiar to us or names that are very different. Paisley?
When I was born, my parents didn't want to know if I was a boy or a girl.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was born, they found out that I was a girl, and then they named.
Yep. All right. So in addition, some Dakota were in debt. They needed to pay back what they owed to the fur traders. The fur trade was not as profitable as it had been decades before. The pelts the Dakota brought to the fur traders were not worth as much as they had previously been. The money received would no longer pay for everything the Dakota needed and wanted. American traders such as Henry Sibley used their kinship ties with Dakota to pressure them into signing treaties that would help pay off those debts. So remember, in the fur trade, the hunters would get their supplies in the fall. They would hunt during the winter because in the fall they got the credit. And I remember I explained that was like a credit card. They would get credit for their supplies. They would hunt all winter, and then with the money they got from the pelts in the spring, they paid off their credit. Well, now nobody's buying their pelts. So they have all of this credit from the fall, all of that debt that now they can't pay off in the spring. So they need to find a new way to pay off that credit. Americans. The fur traders were also in debt. In past years, money from the furs brought in by the Dakota had covered the cost of goods American traders had purchased. As fashions changed, the demand for furs dropped, and so did the price. In the 1830s and 1840s, Sibley and other fur traders were going further and further into debt. These American fur traders had several reasons for encouraging the Dakota to sign treaties. If the Dakota agreed to a treaty, they would receive an immediate cash payment. Sibley and the other traders planned to get some of this money. Then they too could pay off their debts. The traders also saw an opportunity to make money buying and selling land that would be available once treaties were signed. Sibley was Minnesota's most powerful fur trader. He also served as Minnesota's territorial representative in Washington. He played a major role in the treaty-making process and wrote, "The Indians are prepared to make a treaty when we tell them to do so. No treaty can be made without our claims being first secured." So he was looking out for those fur traders to be able to get a piece of that money coming in from the selling of the land. Jocelyn.
When I was younger and I lived in Mankato, I used to like going to parks, and there's a park in Mankato called Sibley Park, and there's like these monumentals and like monuments of like little like things that you can maybe put in the ground about him.
Yep.
So
Yeah, he was a big player in Minnesota back in the day, so there are a lot of places named for him, and there's monuments for him throughout Minnesota. Lifestyle. The Dakota could see their homeland changing. Newcomers were arriving to the region in large numbers, bringing with them a different way of life. Unlike the fur traders, these people wanted to settle. Some Dakota saw treaties as a way to preserve some of their land. They believed having a reservation would provide them a place to continue their traditional lifestyle. It would be land that newcomers could not settle on or control. It would be Dakota land forever. So they were saying, maybe it's good to get this reservation because it will always be ours and we can continue our culture. These white settlers are living differently. They live a different style, and we want to stay who we are. They didn't want to assimilate. They didn't want to change. So they thought the reservations might be a good thing because it'll help them keep their culture alive. Most Americans believe the Dakota should adopt European American ways. The government planned to use some of the annuity payments from treaties to teach the Dakota new skills and ways of life. Often, this was achieved through the work of missionaries, who also encouraged the Dakota to accept Christianity instead of their traditional religion. The missionaries also wanted the treaties to include plans to teach the Dakota to farm like the American newcomers. Missionary Stephen Riggs wrote of the Dakota's close-knit communities, disintegrate them, encourage them to be thrifty farmers rather than poor villagers. So instead of looking out for the well-being of everyone and not having much of anything, teach them how to be farmers so they can get stuff. They can earn more. This plan to make the Dakota stop being Dakota and adopt American ways was called Assimilation. It was designed to teach the Dakota how to live in a world that was dominated by American ways of life. Many Americans did not realize how devastating this change would be to the Dakota. So they're looking at the Dakota saying, you guys don't have much, you're so poor. They didn't realize how rich the Dakota and the Ojibwe were in their lifestyle. Just because they didn't own big things doesn't mean they didn't have richness in their life. They valued their relationships. They valued their family over physical belongings, over that materialism. But the settlers coming in are saying, oh, we can get you so much more. You can have more. So be more like us so you can get more. That was important to the settlers, and they thought it would be important to the Indians. They thought that teaching them these different ways would help them so they could get rich with their materials. They wanted that richness to come into them. So it was important for the settlers to teach the American Indians to be more like them, not because they thought that they wanted to ruin and devastate the American Indians. They didn't know it would be devastating. They thought that bringing in this new lifestyle would help the American Indians grow in their lives and get more. So we are going to end with the recording there. That's the end of our reading. So we're going to say goodbye to our friends at home and hope that they are having a good day. We will talk to you, hopefully see you tomorrow.